It started like any other quiet morning in the small town of Willow Creek, where the trees whispered secrets and time seemed to move a little slower. But behind one little white house, tucked at the edge of the woods, a bond was growing that would one day turn into a legend. Emily was only 10 when she first found him, a mangy, trembling pup, hiding behind a trash bin in the alley behind her school. She was late coming out that day, her backpack heavier than usual, but the moment she saw those wide brown eyes staring up at her, everything else fell away. "Mom, can we keep him? Please. Just until we find where he belongs," she pleaded. He didn't belong anywhere. No collar, no microchip, no missing posters. Just ribs poking through his fur and a limp in his back leg. He was a ghost to the world. But to Emily, he was magic. She named him Rusty, after the reddish streaks in his coat that shimmered in the sunlight. And Rusty, despite his rough start, began to shine. Over the years, Rusty became more than a pet. He was Emily's protector, her shadow, her best friend. When kids teased her at school, Rusty would wait outside the gate, tail wagging, as if to remind her that kindness still existed. When she cried in her room after her parents' divorce, he would nuzzle against her chest, warm and silent. They grew up together. When Emily turned 16 and got her first part-time job at the diner, Rusty would walk her there, then wait outside every evening without fail. He'd sit patiently, eyes scanning the sidewalk, until she emerged again, tired but smiling. Then one night, everything changed. It was near closing. Emily had just finished wiping down the last booth when her coworker James offered to walk her home. She declined gently. Rusty was already waiting outside. The streets were quiet as usual. Rusty trotted beside her, tongue out, enjoying the cool breeze. But as they turned onto Maple Street, a short, dim-lit stretch near the woods, Emily noticed something. A figure, standing too still, watching. She paused. Rusty stopped too, his ears pricked, body tense. "Who's there?" Emily called out, trying to steady her voice. No answer. Just the sound of leaves rustling. Then, without warning, the figure stepped forward. A man, ragged clothes, wild eyes, and in his hand, something that glinted under the street lamp. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs. She took a step back. Rusty growled low. "Give me your purse," the man barked, stepping closer. His hands were shaking. Emily froze. Her mind screamed to run, but her feet were stuck. Rusty snarled, lunging forward with a ferocity she'd never seen before. "Get your mutt back," the man shouted, raising the gun. Time slowed. There was a flash. A bang. Emily felt the air crack. And then, Rusty yelped. She screamed. The man cursed and ran into the woods. But Emily didn't move. She dropped to her knees. Rusty lay on his side, panting hard. His flank was bleeding fast. "No, no, no. Rusty, please stay with me," she whispered, cradling him in her arms. Her trembling hands pressed against the wound, trying to stop the flow. His eyes met hers. Pain, but something else. Trust. Love. "You saved me. Why would you do that?" she whispered, her tears falling onto his fur. He licked her wrist. Weakly. A neighbor heard the gunshot and came running. Police were called. An ambulance for Emily and a vet van for Rusty. They told her later he might not make it through the night. Emily didn't go home. She sat on the cold floor of the animal hospital, her sweatshirt stained with blood, praying to any force that might listen. But as the clock ticked past 2 a.m., the vet finally emerged. "He's not out of the woods yet," she said gently. "But your dog, he's a fighter." Emily looked up, red-eyed and drained. "He's not just a dog. He's my heart." And deep inside that sterile waiting room, with fluorescent lights buzzing above her and hope dangling by a thread, Emily made a vow. If Rusty survived, no matter what it took, she'd make sure the world knew what he did. The story wasn't over. Not yet, because some heroes don't wear capes. Some take bullets. For love. The next 48 hours passed in a haze of fear, hope, and waiting. Emily barely slept. She refused to leave the animal hospital, curled in the corner of the waiting room with a blanket someone had handed her. Her phone buzzed constantly, texts from friends, her mom, even James from the diner, but she ignored most of them. Her world had narrowed to a single heartbeat, Rusty's. He was in surgery for hours. The bullet had torn through muscle but missed his heart by mere inches. It shattered part of his shoulder, and the blood loss had been massive. But the vet, Dr. Marlowe, was determined. "This dog's got more courage in him than most people I've met," she said, updating Emily at every turn. Emily clung to that. The town began to buzz with the news. It wasn't every day a dog took a bullet for a teenager. Local reporters came sniffing around. A few asked to speak with Emily. She said no to all of them. Not yet. Not while he was still fighting. Then, on the third morning, just as the sun was creeping over the horizon, Dr. Marlowe came into the room with a tired but hopeful smile. He made it through the worst. He's stable now. Emily cried for the first time since it happened. Not quiet tears. Deep, soul-shaking sobs of relief. She was allowed to see him later that afternoon. Rusty lay in a recovery kennel, hooked to IVs and wrapped in gauze, but when Emily's voice reached his ears, his tail gave a tiny thump. "Hey, hero," she whispered, kneeling beside him. "You came back to me." His eyes flickered open. One slow blink. Another thump of the tail. The bond between them, already unbreakable, deepened into something sacred. In the days that followed, Rusty began to heal. The community came together in ways Emily never expected. The diner started a donation jar to help with vet bills. Her school held a small fundraiser. Kids who had never spoken to her before dropped off chew toys and blankets. And the man who had attacked her? He was caught 3 days later, thanks to a neighbor's home security footage. He was a drifter with a long record, and he'd never expected a dog to stand in his way. The police chief called Rusty a hero on live TV. But for Emily, it wasn't about headlines or praise. It was about the quiet moments. Feeding Rusty by hand, brushing his fur gently, singing to him when the pain was too much. "Do you remember when I found you?" she said one night, curled beside him on the vet bed. "You were just a scared little thing, all bones and fear. Now look at you, my brave boy." Rusty gazed at her, as if understanding every word. But even as he healed, Emily began to notice something in herself. Something deeper. She had always felt small, overlooked. Her father had left. Kids at school rarely saw her. She'd always been the girl in the corner, clutching her books, dreaming of being strong. But now, people looked at her differently. With respect. With warmth. The bravery Rusty had shown had awakened something inside her. She began journaling the experience, every emotion, every memory. At Dr. Marlowe's suggestion, she started a small blog, Rusty the Brave. It wasn't about going viral. It was therapy, healing. But soon, people from all over started reading it, leaving comments, sharing their own stories of pets who had changed their lives. One day, a letter arrived, handwritten, from a woman in another state who had just lost her service dog to cancer. "Your story reminded me why love is worth the risk," it read. "Rusty's courage helped me start grieving and start healing. Thank you." Emily read it aloud to Rusty, who nuzzled her cheek in reply. "You're changing the world, boy, just by being you." But as Rusty's wounds healed, new questions began to creep in. Would he walk again properly? Would the trauma haunt him? Was the world safe for them now? And in the background, an idea Emily had been quietly pushing away began to take root. She wanted to do more. Not just for Rusty, but for every animal who had been abandoned, mistreated, or overlooked. Because love didn't end with rescue. It began there, and Rusty's story was far from over. Something was stirring. A new purpose. A new path. But what came next would challenge everything they had already survived. Months passed, but the memory of that night never faded. Rusty walked again, slower now, with a slight limp that never quite left. But his spirit, unbroken. Every day, he greeted Emily with the same joy as before, tail wagging, eyes shining, heart full. Emily's blog continued to grow, and with it, a vision began to take shape. She no longer wanted to just tell stories. She wanted to change them. So she made a decision. She would start a rescue. Not just for dogs like Rusty, but for any animal that needed a second chance. With the support of her mom, her school community, and even Dr. Marlowe, Emily began raising funds. She called it Rusty's Promise. "Because if he could risk his life for me," she told her first group of volunteers, "then I can spend mine fighting for others like him." It wasn't easy. She was still in school, juggling classes, shifts at the diner, and late-night planning sessions. But every challenge seemed small compared to what Rusty had endured. The first rescue came on a rainy October evening. A German shepherd abandoned in a ditch. They named her Hope. Then came Max, a blind cat found near the highway. Then Luna, a 3-legged bunny. Each one came broken, but none left that way. Rusty became a quiet leader among them. Though he no longer chased balls or ran across fields, he offered something deeper: comfort, calm, courage. He would sit beside the newest arrivals, as if whispering, "You're safe now. Just breathe." The shelter grew. Local news ran a follow-up segment titled Asterisk From Bullet to Blessing, Rusty's Legacy. Asterisk. Donations poured in. Volunteers showed up in droves. Emily was invited to speak at schools, community centers, even a national animal welfare conference. But one moment stood above all. It was a year to the day since the shooting. Emily held a small ceremony at the shelter. Dozens attended. Kids Rusty had comforted, families who had adopted rescues, even the police officer who had helped arrest the man that night. Rusty, wearing a little red vest with the words "Founder and Hero," sat beside Emily on the stage. She stepped up to the mic, voice shaking but clear. "I used to believe I was invisible. That love meant loss. That people left and pain stayed. But this dog, he taught me different." She looked down at Rusty, eyes glassy with emotion. "He didn't just save my life. He gave it purpose. He reminded me that even when the world is dark, we can be the light for someone else." The audience stood, applauded. Some cried. After the ceremony, Emily took Rusty to the same spot where it had all happened, Maple Street. The streetlight still flickered. The sidewalk still curved just so. She knelt beside him. "Do you remember this place?" she whispered. "This is where you became my hero." Rusty looked at her, leaning his head into her chest. There was no fear in his eyes, only peace. And as the wind rustled the trees overhead, Emily smiled. Because she knew their story was never really about one night, or one bullet, or even one act of bravery. It was about loyalty, about healing, about what love looks like when it shows up and refuses to leave. Years later, when Rusty finally passed, old, loved, and surrounded by the animals he had helped, Emily buried him beneath the tallest tree on the shelter grounds. Above his resting place stood a small wooden sign. He took a bullet so she could find her purpose. And under it, Rusty the Brave, forever loved, forever remembered. Asterisk, asterisk. Emily still visits that spot every week, sitting with a cup of coffee and whispering the latest shelter updates. And every new animal who arrives at Rusty's promise is gently introduced to his tree. Because even in death, Rusty still welcomes them, still protects them, and still reminds everyone who hears his story, love is worth the risk. Always, asterisk, asterisk.